Hi folks, today I'd like to talk about the emotional spiritual connection. And I guess what I would begin by saying is when I look at the world, I see a world of people trying to run before they can work in matters of the spiritual endeavor. Um, they are basically trying to deal with the spiritual, but they haven't learned to walk. In other words, they're emotionally unstable, they're emotionally blocked. And this is the state of affairs in our world today. And I think furthermore, it can also explain that the spiritual fanatic, the yoga, the meditation, the religious fanatic, because when one hasn't purified and healed and unblocked the emotional center, it gives one a tendency to, when they seek the spiritual, on some unconscious level, they're not really getting that. The spiritual is not fixing the emotional, so therefore they double their efforts, and deep down they can get no satisfaction, even though they'll come across and be quite preachy, and perhaps even self-righteous, but it might explain the spiritual fanatic. And I think the other thing to consider is this very common idea, particularly in religious circles and even the New Age spiritual circle, is that you can heal the emotional with the spiritual. And in most cases, um, it's a lie. And the reason why it's a lie is because many religious and spiritual paths don't really heal the whole person. They do not really, they're not holistic in the sense of really addressing and understanding the terribly important key to spiritual success is a healthy and functional emotional center. So the problem really in our world today is a lack of holistic, emotional, spiritual paths. And I think the other problem is that people generally are hiding from their shadows. So they find when you live like that, you're hiding from your shadows. You naturally gravitate towards paths, spiritual and religious paths that allow you to keep your shadow hidden. You will be attracted to a teaching and ideologies that on a conscious level will represent something. But if things could be stripped bare, you are actually unconsciously gravitating towards things that allow you to take on truths that are convenient, but deny truths that you prefer to remain in the shadows. And again, this can happen at an unconscious level. We also have what I call the light sider, and these are those that avoid the shadow at all costs. Love and light, peace, and world peace. And I think world peace is very important, and love is extremely important. But these light siders they run from anything negative, and they now we do need to focus on what is positive and what is loving and what is right and what is noble. But at the same time, when it's at the expense of not looking at our shadows, then it's dangerous to so I call them light siders, which is to basically, and you can only really have full light when you focus that light on the darkness, therefore having a holistic light, you could say, not by running away from your shadows and also the shadows in the world. What I wanted to say as well is many people are familiar with that expression, know yourself. And people go, well, I know myself, I kind of know myself. And I think essentially what people really know is their conscious self, their egoistic self. And I would say to know yourself is to know what you don't know about yourself. This is the trick. And a good way of looking at it is man as iceberg. So if you think about the tip of the iceberg, it's just the top part, and this is the state of man. In most cases, that the world is their world. Everything they see is from them sitting on that iceberg. But if you go underneath the water, you'll find that tip is part of something very deep and generally unconscious. The unconscious needs to be made conscious for a man to truly know himself. And how does one sort of, poke into the water? How does one look in. I think it begins by a genuine self-honesty. And I'm not talking about your everyday peripheral honesty of being honest with your friend and, you know, I regard this honesty as more of a confessional honesty. In other words, revealing stuff that is uncomfortable, a confessional, exposing yourself kind of honesty, which very, very few people tend to do. Um, I find it interesting. There's a writer called Moraviev, a Russian writer, and he says that this false self, this egoistic, the conscious self, is maintained by three things. That it's maintained by your name, by your memory, and thirdly, which I find very interesting, it's maintained by the lies that you tell yourself. I mean, just reflect on that. Your personality is maintained by the lies that you tell yourself. And most people are not really aware of the lies that they are telling to themselves. Um, and I think that we fear a deeper self-truth because that would call us to face what we don't understand, the things that make us feel uncomfortable, to face our shadows, and also to face the uncomfortable but necessary collapse of our inauthentic self, our unreal, illusory. It's a bit like the building your structure, your house on sand. It's fragile and takes a lot of work to kind of keep up there, keep it standing. Yet, what people forget, I think, is that with this fear of the collapse, that if one allows this collapse, which comes through true self-honesty, it allows you a chance to build something on the rock, to build something truly substantial that can't be pushed around by the winds and the weathers of life. And you can build an authentic self. And it really is quite some burden to hold on to something that's fractured, that's not really authentic, which is what a lot of people are doing. And I think that people generally, because of this unconsciousness, they try to apply their fractured self to spirituality, and all you ever get is distortion and illusion. That unless the unconscious is made conscious, unless the emotional center is purified and unblocked, you will only ever have spiritual distortion and spiritual illusion. It is not possible to have the spiritual without the emotional. And the worst part of this, the tragedy, is those believing they've attained it without purifying the emotional center don't even realize that they're deluded or in illusion. And it's quite unfortunate. Just as a couple of examples of this sort of unconsciousness, there was a person I was chatting to, and they felt their reactiveness, their sort of aggression and anger came from the alignment, the astrological alignment. And knowing this person to some degree, I do sense that I think that the anger stems more from childhood trauma. I know this person, their story fairly well, and what they've done is they've maneuvered using astrology to explain something that really, in fact, has more to do with anger at the treatment as a child. And this is how we lie to ourselves. To give you a personal example, I found that before I did emotional healing, which was actually for me through psychotherapy, but there are a number of other sort of body modalities, body work, and these kind of things that can also reveal and heal the emotional center. Anyway, prior to this therapy, I had a very strong sense of fairness and a real reactivity towards unfairness. In fact, it was a kind of rage towards unfairness. And I would tell myself, when I was unconscious and unhealed, I would tell myself that, I'm a man that stands up for what's right. But what I realized when I was sort of going through this therapeutic process was that was my story. Of what was lying underneath this was several experiences as a child where I faced a lot of unfairness. And I found that when I really realized this, and a lot of pain surfaced, a lot of wounds surfaced, and as I healed those things, then I could stand up for what was right without being enraged and damaging my relationships. So these are just examples of the way the stories we tell ourselves, you could say, and that's why it takes a real special kind of honesty, a special awareness, and it's the ability to look at our lives and really look at the threads that don't fit, because we don't really do that. We believe the lies we tell ourselves, and I think that it's our responsibility. Only us can, see the signs within our life that are telling us that this thing is not meshing. It's not a real true life, and certain things are not making sense that we're overlooking and dismissing. And I think what happens with these childhood wounds is that they very much get buried, and but they tend to manifest in the unconscious ways we live our adult life. And this is the best indicator of our unconscious, our childhood wounds, is how they show up in a life that's unconscious, in relationships, and how we go about things that we think we understand, but we don't really understand why we do what we do. Or we give reasons for why we do what we do, which aren't the real reasons. And, as I've said, the truth of the matter is that the unhealed, unpurified emotional center leads to spiritual distortion and spiritual deception. You cannot have the spiritual without the emotional. And the solution to all this is a greater self-honesty, and to also be willing to raise the white flag. That means to be willing to admit the inconsistencies in your own life. That takes courage to do that. And in regards to help with these matters, I think psychotherapy can really be helpful in terms of making the unconscious conscious. If you happen to see a good psychotherapist who doesn't try to be a guru, but it helps you, discover yourself. And then you have things like body work that can really kind of bypass the barrier, the lies here, and just could release these things that bypass this front that we tend to have. And ultimately, seeking holistic pathways that really cater for the emotional, spiritual needs of man. And, we have to grow up and stop being, in our spiritual endeavors, being ones that really gather around ourselves ideas and people that ultimately just tell us what our itching ears want to hear, rather than what the soul really needs. Okay, thank you for your attention. Have a nice day.